workflows as a series of tasks. So it's essentially do this, then do this, then do this. And a task can be as simple as send an email to somebody, or you can do really complex things with scripts that we'll get into today. You can create credentials, modify users, lots of different things. And we have two types of workflows in QReserve. The first one we call subscriptions. And these are a series of tasks that you run on a calendar basis. And so they're called subscriptions because they were initially used to manage actual subscriptions. So someone might have a subscription to your facilities and they pay a monthly fee, for example. Well, that's something you can automate with a subscription workflow and say every month on the 1st, create an invoice, charge their credit card, etc. And you can come up with your own schedule for when those run. The other type of a workflow is what we call a trigger. And these don't run on a schedule, but instead they run as a result of an event in the system. So for example, a reservation was created, or maybe a reservation ended, or maybe someone's request was approved. And then when this happens, it will trigger your workflow to run. And there are quite a few different tasks and workflows, and we are always looking to add more tasks. Some of them here are, we can send an email, you can modify the approvers on a reservation. So this is actually something that's quite powerful in that you can say, once we have a reservation that's approved by the built-in approvers, we want to add someone else, kind of like a last approver, and you can even say only if certain conditions are met. We can emit webhooks, and if you don't know what those are, that's fine. But essentially, it's a way for you to talk to another system. So it's a way to say, maybe when a reservation is created, you want to send a message to your own server that's running some software listening for that, and you can process that data yourself. You could post a Slack message to your Slack channels. You can update custom properties on users or resources. Obviously, run a script, generate invoices, create credential records. And there's more tasks as well that you can pick from. So most of this today is going to be me just in QReserve, taking you through the steps of creating a new workflow, and then we'll enhance them with scripts as we go, so you can kind of see how these pieces get layered on. And so for this, I've just made a demo website here, and I've created a resource that we're going to call the particle decelerator. Hop over to the calendar. So this is a simple resource, and I have a form attached to it. So I'll just make a reservation, show you how this is set up. So we have our particle decelerator. I have a rate set up here for $100 per hour. And I have one simple form, and the question is, do you plan to manipulate time? And this is just a silly example, but the idea is that maybe this is something that makes this reservation different, right? It makes it more dangerous. And we'll show you how we can use this information with logic in our scripts to make decisions in our workflows. So I can go ahead and make that reservation, and it gets saved. Now, another trick I'm using here is you might notice that we have two different colors because I actually have a form field set up to change the color, which I'll show you in a second. Okay, the other thing I have is I have two tabs open just to make it easier for me to kind of bounce back and forth, and we can show how I'm relating different parts of the system together. So we'll start off, and I'm going to do this all from scratch. And so, you know, with any computer software demo, who knows what's going to happen, but hopefully everything goes well today. So you can find your workflows under the administration panel, obviously, for your QReserve site. And when we're in workflows, we have the two types, subscriptions and triggers. And so for today's demo, I'm going to start off by making a trigger. And up at the top here, we have two options, create trigger and create template. A template is just a normal trigger or a subscription workflow that doesn't run, but if you're making many that look very similar, you can easily clone templates. But for today, we're just going to create a standard trigger and look at some of the options here. So I'm going to use this trigger to essentially send an email to, say, like lab staff whenever a reservation gets made. And so by default, the trigger is paused, which means it won't actually run automatically until we enable it. So this gives you time to set things up and it won't run by accident. So let's call this new reservation trigger. And you can give it a description so it shows up when you're viewing it. A hidden note is something only visible to administrators. And over here, the notification addresses. Once a day, if you have an email in here and you have these checked off, you can receive a summary email of how your previous day's workflows ran. So not every workflow can be considered a success. Sometimes you might have something that fails. Maybe you have a task to make a reservation, but it hits a conflict. Or maybe a webhook tried to post information to your server and your server was down or it returned an error. So these are going to be all logged in your workflow logs, but you're not expected to have to log in every day and look. And so what we can do is we can send you an email once a day. And typically, people will turn the first option off. So they're not notified of successful runs. They're only notified if there's failed runs. And then when you get it, you can log in and you can look at the details and decide what you do next. The next option for triggers is the condition. And this is where we set up, when do we actually want this to run? And so for a lot of triggers, it's going to be based on reservations. And there's a few different options here. So you can say, oh, I don't think you can see my menu. So we can say, does it run when the approvals change? Does it run when a maintenance is created or a request is made? Things like that. So there's a few different options there, but for now, I'm just going to stick with reservations. We'll say when a reservation happened. And then on the right-hand side, we can say, when do we want this to happen? Time of event means when we actually made the reservation. So if I make a reservation right now, it runs right now. We can also say, I want this to run at the start of the reservation, or I want this to run at the end of the reservation, and you can give it an offset. So I could say, I want this to run 1 hour after the end of the reservation. And we have customers who are using this to say, send a post-reservation survey or a thank you email, or maybe a reminder 5 minutes before a reservation's over, make sure you clean up your workstation before you leave, things like that. So for our example, I'm just going to say time of event, because when someone books it, we want this to run right away, and we'll say there's no offset. Then the final options you have here for your trigger condition is what resource do you want this to run on? You can either say, I want this to run on a particular resource, or if you want it to run on several different resources, you can tag those with a tag and then have this trigger run on the tag. So it would run on every resource with that tag. You can also, and I won't do this for this demo, set up multiple trigger conditions. So maybe I want this to run both at the beginning and at the end for some reason. Maybe I want it to run on 2 specific resources that don't have tags. I can just make multiple trigger conditions, and if any of those conditions are met, this is going to run. So scrolling down, next we have our testing window. And this is really useful when you're building a new workflow to test things out. And I'm going to demonstrate how we can do that. But first, we need to actually have some tasks that we want to run. And so I'll build this up step by step and show you how we can give it more and more functionality. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select send an email. This is basically what I want this trigger to be. And so this injects our send an email task. Now, I don't need a script for any of this. I can just fill these in directly in the user interface and I can run it. So let's see an example here. So I'm going to have these get sent to Marissa, who is our lab manager for today. And I'll say the subject is the particle decelerator was booked. And we'll say, check the website for details. So this isn't very useful because every single email is going to look exactly the same. But we can test this out. And the way you test it out is you have to give it a reservation to test against. So you're saying, let's pretend this reservation triggered this. And what we need to do for that is get the reservation ID. So I'm going to pop over to my other tab here, which is the same site. I just have this set up to be on the calendar. And I'll click on this reservation for tomorrow. And down here, we have the ID. And so all you have to do is you can just click on it, and it automatically copies it to your clipboard. So I can come back here, paste that in, and now I can test this trigger on that existing reservation as if it was just made. So I'll hit test, and it's going to say if everything worked great. And for some of the tasks, you can actually see what the output would be. So in this case, it's saying it would generate an email, it would have the subject, and here's what the email would look like. Okay, so this is super basic. It's functional, it works, no scripting required. But to make something like this really useful, this is where we want to add scripts and start to make things a bit more custom. So I'm going to add a script tag first. One thing that might be obvious, but I'll point out, is that these tasks always run in order. So if you want a script to manipulate the email task, you have to run the script task first. And the other thing we have to do is we have to start using these task ID fields, because you have to tell future tasks which script output you want to look at. Because you could maybe have 2 or 3 scripts that are all running that have different jobs, and you want one script to make your email, one script to modify your invoices, or something like that. And so you have to just link them together via these task IDs. And so right away, I'll give my script task the task ID script. You don't have to use all caps. That's a convention I like to use, but you can call it anything you want. And then down here, for my input, I'm going to say I want to use the script task ID as my input. Now, what do we actually put in the script, and what do these different tasks want to see? So essentially, your script has to generate a value that will be injected into future tasks. And you can see what those are by expanding the input script task ID for a task. These will typically have built-in documentation saying what information is it looking for. So this is where we're going to start to kind of get a little codey. There is some curly brackets here that typically represent what we call an object or a dictionary in Python and sneq. And then these items, these fields in quotes, are the key, and then they have a value. So what we can set here on the invoice task is we can say a recipient ID. So this is the user ID of who you want to receive it. You can set the subject, the body, and also vars, which is short for variables. And for this demo, I'm going to use the vars section. What this lets you do is inject pieces of the body that you inject in, and then you can have them appear without having to compose the entire body in your script. So it just makes it a bit simpler to manage longer messages. So here's how this is going to work. So I'm going to take my existing email, and I'll say details, summary. So this is how we inject variables into our email task. We use a $ and then the name of the variable. And again, that's all in here. If you're looking at the details, you can see here that you just put the string in like that. And again, this is using capital letters. You don't have to. It can be uppercase or lowercase. That doesn't matter. It's just a convention often to use capital letters. Okay, so now we have summary. And if I run this now, well, actually I won't do anything because I'm not returning anything. Let's just run it. Perfect. So it's going to run the script, but it's going to say the email task failed because I told it expect an input from the script. It couldn't find anything, so it's like, I don't know what to do. So now let's write a script. And we'll start off super simple. I'm going to use return, And again, so I'm just going to assume a little baseline of programming. I'm not going to be teaching how to program at all. There's tons of examples, and at the end, you'll see we can even use AI to help write some things for us. But let's just start off by returning an object. And I can say, we saw before that we have to return something with vars, which is itself an object. And in this case, we want to call one summary. This is the summary. And one of the nice things with our editor is that if you have a really bad mistake, like I forgot a quote, then it will highlight it and it won't let you save it. So you can always hover your mouse over these error lines and it's going to tell you something's missing here. So in this case, there's no matching quote. Add the quote, hit save. And now if I run our test, it works. We can look at the output from the script. So here's what the script is returning. And here is our email. So it replaced that summary variable with the text I just put in. All right, so the next thing is, obviously this is useless. We probably want a summary of the reservation itself. Well, luckily we have injected variables into our scripts that give you context about what's going on. I'm popping back over here for a second to our website just to show you where this information is, because you're not going to remember all of this. I don't remember all of this. I'm often looking things up. If I want to see what context is available, I'm in the scripting documentation under workflow scripts. Then we have workflow context. So here, this is saying what the context in a script is, what variables or data is injected in by default. And in this case, we have outputs, so you can get a list of all the previous outputs from tasks above that script. You can get some information about the workflow. So was it run manually or was it automatic? And this is the key, reservation. So a reservation object is injected in. So I can use reservation and then summary. And how do I know summary is available? This is also in our documentation. If we go under language reference and then data dictionaries, reservations, this is everything available to you in that reservation object. It's a lot. There's a ton of stuff here. As you know, reservations in QReserve can be very complex. They can have a lot of different things attached to them. So in this case, I just know that, I keep on scrolling down, summary is here. So summary is available. And what this does is the summary is just a pre-built representation of the reservation. So let's hit save. And we'll test this. And so it worked. And if I view the email now, here's the details. So that's a summary of the reservation that I had just made. And we're using the script to pull it out of the context and inject it into the email task. This could also be a Slack task, or it could be a webhook, for example. All right, so let's get a little bit more complicated and a little bit more interesting here. Let's suppose that we want to have some more information if this is a specific type of reservation. So let's say, for example, anything that runs at night, we want to highlight that. And we want to have a warning in the email, because something that runs at night, we need to make sure someone's on campus or someone's there to let them in, for example. So we can start to add more logic and not just make this a single return statement. So I'm going to refactor this code a little bit to make things a bit easier for us. So I'm going to make a variable, say vars equals, and I'm just going to say equals this dictionary. And now we can start to manipulate this dictionary. So I'm going to also have another field. I'm going to call it warning. And by default, I'll keep it blank. And then now I can start to use some logic, so like if statements, for example. And in this case, my logic is going to be, if this reservation is starting after 8 p.m., I want to say this is a night run. So I will use if date time .info. And this is a function that's available in sneq in the documentation. Let me say dt equals reservation. Now when you start, and I'll extract the hour from that. So I'll say if this is over 20, because it returns 24-hour time. So 2000 hours is 8 o'clock p.m. Now I want to modify my warning. So the way we do that in sneq to modify a dictionary is I'll say bars equals bars, and then you essentially merge on the difference. So in this case, I'll say warning, night, run. And then at the bottom, we can just return the final full object. But in this case, our bars is in the top dictionary. Okay, and so finally, in order to use this warning, which is just another variable, I just have to inject it somewhere. So I'll edit our main body, and I'll say warning. Okay, perfect. So I believe the one I got it from here, 3 p.m. Right. So if I run this now, oh, perfect, our script crashed. That means I made a mistake. When your script crashes, you get a lot of information. So in this case, I misspelled the variable. Whenever it crashes, this is why you should be testing things. We try and give you a lot of information. And you can also, on top here, so we say, what is the actual error? And in this case, clearly I forgot an S. But you can also see things like, what is the value of all the variables I have in my script? Or I can say, what is the context? So this is everything that got injected into my script. So here's the reservation context. Outputs is empty because that's the first task in the workflow. But this is just super useful to help to debug things. So I'll add my S. And let's try this again. OK, so this time it worked. And here, there's no warning because this is a 3 p.m. reservation. But if I look at this one on Friday, this one starts at 9 p.m. So I'll copy that ID, and we'll test this one instead. That didn't work. Why didn't that work? Oh, let's see. It's live demo, see?
I think maybe there's an S missing on the var.
Didn't I already fix that one here?
The first var. The var equals to.
Oh,
yep.
Thank you. OK. Perfect. Cindy, by the way, if you haven't met Cindy, is an expert at sneq scripting, and she can write anything. So appreciate that live debugging. Let's try this one more time. Yay, now it worked. So it used the logic, and it injected and modified the output to have this new one. OK. Perfect. Thank you very much, Cindy. So I'm going to do one more, and I'm going to go through this part a little bit quicker, just not to drag this out, but just to show how we can kind of take this to the next level and inspect information in your reservation a bit more. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at forms. And maybe we don't care so much about the night run, but we do really care if we're going to be manipulating time, because that sounds pretty dangerous. And that's not available in the main reservation. That's a form. So I'm going to pop over here and go to Administration and Forms. And so here's our form that we have attached to this resource. In order to get the information we need, we have to enable advanced mode that turns on all these scary options. But the key here is that we can now see the form ID, and we can see the field IDs. These are ways that we can directly extract information from the reservation. So I have these just written out. Save some time. Again, I'm using capital letters for these variables here. That's not specifically required. So one of the things we can do is we can say, you can skip tasks based on your logic. So down here, I'm going to give this email task an ID. I'm just going to call it email. And let's say we want the logic to be, I don't want to bother Marissa unless this is a scary reservation that manipulates time. So the way we do that is we have the task there, but we can use the sneq script to say skip it if certain conditions are met. So I'll get rid of this night run, or I guess we'll leave that there. That can be a warning as well. But I'm going to make a new variable called skip, and we'll call it email. And I'm going to return it. With any script, you can essentially inject a key called skip and then a list of task IDs. So in this case, if I were to run this right now, it's when this task gets that script, it's going to see skip. So you can see here, this is one of the inputs. If it sees that, we're going to skip this task completely. So by default, right now, if I run this, the task runs, but you see that this is blue because the task has been skipped. And we don't always want to skip it. We only want to skip it if we're not manipulating time. So the way we can do this logic is I'll say, we can use one of our utility functions to extract a form field. So I'll say util.forms form response value from ID and field ID. Okay, so form ID equals form ID. So I'm just saying the form ID is this string up there that we set. The field ID is that field ID, which was the checkbox. And I want to say, okay, if this is true, which means it's checked, then skip equals nothing. I must have typed it in wrong again. Oh, util forms. I'm going to copy and paste this so I make sure I don't type it wrong. There we go. I must have been missing a character. Okay, so the logic here is we're saying by default, our skip variable is we're going to skip the email. But if that option is on, that field, then we're going to say skip nothing. The square brackets mean it's a list or an array of items. So we're going to have it empty, and then the email task will run, and it will look at the vars. All right, so we have, let's pop back over to the calendar. So first, I'll check this one. So this one is green, so it's not manipulating time. And if I test it, we skipped it. And this one on Friday, it is manipulating time. Let's see here. Do you plan to manipulate time? Yes. If we test this one, it ran this time. So this is why these workflows can be really powerful. Some of you may be thinking, oh, another way we've used the system to notify people is you can add them as an approver, for example. There might be an approver on a resource, and they're auto-approved, but they get notified. So that way they get notified every time a reservation is made. But you don't want to bug them every single time, right? You have some logic or some reason when you actually want to notify them. Well, in this case, you can use scripts to selectively choose when you run different tasks. Okay. So I think I'll leave this trigger example here where it is now. And I want to quickly do a subscription workflow. Oh, one thing, this has caught people before. When you're ready to go, you've tested your trigger, you've made it, don't forget to activate it and turn it on. Otherwise, it's never going to run. So for our subscription workflow, I'm going to make a subscription that will run and give a weekly summary of reservations. So maybe you want to send an email to someone every Friday morning of the past week of reservations that just happened. So I'm creating my subscription workflow here, and I'll say I want this to run, let's say, weekly, every Friday, every week. I can run at midnight, doesn't matter. And you would typically assign it to a user. You don't have to use this user object, but the way like historically these were made is that it would be assigned to some user. And then we'll set this up just like before. So basically, the only difference between a trigger and subscription is what triggers it, right? So now we have a series of dates where this is expected to run. And then for testing, we don't have to give it a reservation because it's not triggered by a reservation. Instead, we say run it as if it was this date. And for our tasks here, I'm going to do an email. And I'm actually going to keep this. So by default, you can see it puts the user in, whoever owns the subscription. I'll leave, I'll put weekly reservations. But we will fill the body in ourselves. And I'll add a script to the top. And the first thing we want to do is we need to give our script an ID. Doesn't have to be script. You can come up with something more specific if that makes sense. And I'll say this email task, the input is script. And then I'll just write this out and I'll kind of talk as I go. But hopefully it makes sense logically what we're doing. So first, I'm just going to say when is now, because we're doing this relative to a certain time. So I'll say now equals date time now. And then the past week. So we need to know our range. And date time dot add. But then I'll say days equals -7. So I'm going to go back in time 7 days. And then we need to fetch a list of reservations. So I'll call this reservations equals, and this is using our sneq API functions. The util functions are utilities to help manipulate data. Anything that starts with API is something that's essentially doing something inside with your QReserve data. So we'll say api.reservations.fetch. And then this will take a few different inputs. One of them is we need to know which resource we want. So I have the ID of our particle accelerator there. Reservable ID equals reservable ID. And then start past week, start a week ago, end equals now. So this will give reservations a list of the reservations. And then now we want to build our email. And I'm just going to copy this and paste this in for the interest of time. But I'll explain what I'm doing. So first of all, if you want to have a new line, and you just want to inject it in the string, sometimes in some languages you can use /n. We don't support that in sneq. Instead, you have to actually call this function strings.newline. So just for brevity, I'll just assign that output to the variable nl for newline. And that way I can just add it on like this. So what we're doing here is we're saying, let's have summaries of reservations for the past 7 days. And then we have a for loop. So for each res in reservations, extract the summary, and then we'll build up this body text as we go. One brief thing, if anybody here is an actual Python programmer and you're into specifying types for variables, we do support those. This is something we just released in the past week or so. And so my example here, I had put a type where I can say this is a string, and it just helps you write better code and make sure you're not mixing things up, like trying to add 5 to the string hello, for example. Completely optional though. So if you don't know what that is, you don't have to worry about that. Okay, so we built up our body text. And then I can just say return. And in this case, I'm not using vars. I'm actually just injecting the full text of the body in. Text. Okay, and we'll test it just for today. So if I pop back over to the calendar, you see we have 2 reservations in the past 7 days. And I'll hit test for date. And so it ran the script, and then I can look at the email, and here are my 2 reservations injected in. So this is just an example of how using the API can be really useful to pull data. And you might want to pull information about the user. So maybe you want to say if the user who made a reservation in a trigger is in a students group. Well, in that case, you want to email the lab manager. But if they're a grad student or a staff member, you don't want to bother. So you may pull the user groups that the user was in. You can pull information about custom properties and things like that. So a lot of really powerful things you can use with the APIs. And in our documentation, under scripting here on the left, we have our API reference. And so here's all the different things you can access. So for example, I was talking about users. So you can pull credentials, account numbers, user groups, custom properties, information about resources. Just a lot of information to help you make the different decisions you need when you're writing those scripts. All right, so about 40 minutes in, and I do want to have some time at the end if there are any general questions, but I'll just give a quick, really a preview of what AI could help with when you're writing these scripts. So on our website and documentation, under scripting, there's a page here called LLM skills. Essentially, what a skill is I think I made a thing for this. Essentially, what a skill is you can take a general AI model and you can give it a bunch of information that says, how do you do something very specific? And then you can ask it to do something very specific with it. And so what we've done is we've developed a skill for sneq to write the different types of scripts. Now, the way you use those is going to be highly dependent on the different platforms you use. This isn't something that we're ready to actually build into the site yet and have you run. It's still something that's somewhat experimental. It's something we've been using internally as a way to test it. But if you are someone familiar with using AI systems, maybe you use Claude or Gemini or something like that, you're more than welcome to go ahead and give this a try. So we just have this hosted on our GitHub, and you can go and you can download it. It's a skill.md file. But if you have no idea what I'm talking about, I'll just show you kind of like the cool magic of what we can do here. And what I'm going to do is I'll write a reservation script. So today we've been focusing on workflow scripts, but you may be aware we have scripts for many different things. So you can write a reservation script that helps you have the rules and logic for who can make reservations when or manipulate reservations. Rate scripts help you dynamically come up with the rate of a request or a reservation. Invoice scripts let you dynamically decide what your invoice items look like when you make those with your invoice wizard. And then the approver scripts lets you dynamically decide who approves a reservation. So a ton of power. But for now, I'm just going to demonstrate this with a really simple reservation script. Okay. So I am going to demo this with Gemini, where we have installed our skill as a gem. That's what Gemini calls these different skills you set up. I just basically attached my skill, and now this Gemini prompt calls itself an expert sneq writer. So I'm going to have this very simple thing, create a reservation script that displays the disclaimer, don't stay up too late if the reservation starts on or after 9 p.m. And I'll give it the pro treatment so it thinks a bit harder. So this will take a few seconds and it's going to go through. The other thing that we find this skill is useful is if you've written a sneq script and you can't quite get it to work properly, you can paste it into your AI and say, use your skill to help me debug this. All right. So Gemini has written our script. Looks pretty good. I'm just going to copy it. And we'll come over here, paste it in, hit save, and let's give it a quick test. Let's see if it works. First off, it's AI, so it doesn't always work. So 2 p.m., I'm not seeing anything. Let's go and book something for 10 p.m. There we go. We got a disclaimer. Don't stay up too late. And you can also come back and say, oh, like enhance it to only show the message if your name starts with B. Something completely silly, but I just want to show you how useful this can be. And so it knows when I say if your name, the skill knows that, okay, I can look at the reservation, I can look at the reserved for object, I know that name is in the display name, and I know how to extract information about that string, I know how to compare it, and then it should be able to write a script that does that. All right, so let's try this one more time, copy and paste it in. Let's just see if this works. One shot, no errors. So I'll go back and say 10 p.m. I see it because my name starts with B. If I make this for Marissa, it goes away. So that's something that we're pretty excited about. Obviously, this stuff moves really fast, and it's something that it's always kind of there with an asterisk, like this may not work. Sometimes when we ask it to do something, it spits something out that just doesn't work right off the bat. But it can help really get things going and help you diagnose issues. So I just did that live demo. Resources for all of this. So I've been hinting at like documentation. That's something that we're always working on improving. I know that it's not always completely up to date all the time. So if you're looking for something and you point it out to us, trust me, that will go right to the top of the list for us to make sure we get that documented. The sneq LLM skill I was just talking about, that's listed from there in the documentation you can download and use. And obviously, we are always here to help. So if you have questions about scripts, if you want to know, can I do this, or my script's not working, always just open a support ticket, and one of us, if it's scripting, you'll probably hear from Cindy or myself. We are probably the two most resident experts on the topic. But yeah, we definitely want to help you make sure you get your workflows and your logic working as you need. So that's the end of what I had planned for today. I'm happy to entertain some questions. One of the tricky parts with scripting in these workflows is that a lot of it can be hyper-specific to your needs. So if you have something very specific about your site or a specific script, that's probably best for a support ticket or an offline discussion. But any more broad questions about capabilities and so on, happy to talk about those.
Just a reminder for everybody too, just if you want to type in the chat or the Q&A, you can submit an anonymous question if you'd like to. Click on the bottom right of your screen in the Google Meet controls. There's a chat speech button or speech bubble icon, or the dots, and Q&A will get you into our Q&A feature that we can monitor. That was fun. Those are fun examples. And hopefully you've got the creative juices flowing now and thinking about how scripting can maybe be of use in your sites that you've got. So we're happy to answer any questions you might have.
Often if we don't have a built-in feature, it's because there's like 2 or 3 people who might need it. But that's why scripting exists, so that we can have it implemented for you and have it super customized, so it's doing exactly what you're looking for. Like another very common one is you can have rules around reservations depending on different user groups. So maybe you have a group of, say you're in a university lab and you want to have each other lab have a maximum of 5 hours on a particular instrument a week. You can use their API to check how many hours has this group had across all users and block them, or let them through, or charge them more if they're past the 5 hours, for example. All those types of things that you'll never find as a one-click button in any platform because it's so specific is exactly what you can implement with these scripts.
Yes, the recording of the webinar will be posted on our website. Give us a few days and we will have it up for you. Also, if anybody needs a certificate for of attendance for continuing education hours, I'll have an email that I'll send out after this webinar to everybody that was registered. So it will have a link to the request for that, and I'm happy to send out a certificate for you if you need it. All right, I don't see any questions. I think it's a lot of information to absorb at once. So if anything does come up from anybody after the webinar, again, as Brandon mentioned, please just feel free to send us an email that will create a ticket and we will get back to you. I can tell you it will not be me that is returning any scripting questions, but Cindy or Brandon will be able to get back to you with any help or to answer any questions that you might have in regards to scripting and using sneq. So thank you so much, everybody, for attending. We really appreciate it. Just a note that our Q2 QUniversity webinars, we have 2 of them already posted on the website that are open for registration. And we'll be sending out a communication about that too in the upcoming week or 2 for more information. So we've got those available and ready. So feel free to head on over to QReserve.com, click on QUniversity, and you'll be able to register for those April and May webinars now. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.